If we can have everybody come back up for a brief discussion. I mean, there's so much more that could be said about each one of these cities, but what we'd like to do is have some of our other guests weigh in on the presentations and then hopefully end in a more general discussion. I will say as a caveat that I may have to leave early. The dean will finish. I have a live radio show that begins in 15 minutes after this, so I may have to step out. Liz provided an overview of Miami. I was wondering if both Galen and Matt, maybe beginning with you, Matt, you might be able to give us a more detailed context for the current role that you play at the City of Coral Gables as it relates perhaps specifically to the questions of sustainability and infrastructure.
Absolutely. So happy to be here. For the last 8 years, I've served as the Resiliency and Sustainability Manager for the City of Coral Gables. Really was brought on board when the city started our journey on sustainability and how we were going to reduce our operational impacts on the environment. I recently just transitioned over to our parking and mobility department to also move sustainability into that department, but also looking at alternative transportation and overseeing our alternative transportation options in the city, because transportation does account for our largest greenhouse gas emissions when we come to looking at our community-wide, so having an impact on that as well. So our journey on sustainability really started in the city in 2015. We developed a sustainability management plan that was actually looking at our government operations and where we can reduce our operational impacts on the environment, really looking at, to your point, the two buckets, adaptation and mitigation. So really looking at mitigation and reducing, our electricity use, our fuel use, and really our greenhouse gas emissions when we really come down to it, and having an impact within our community, and also educating our residents and our businesses as being part of that solution, because we as a government can do everything we want and achieve all the goals that we set, but it's really about the larger community and partnering with the region, like the county and Galen and the South Florida Regional Climate Compact that we've been a part of since I joined the city in 2015. So really being part of those larger regional discussions. So our city has made a lot of progress on the mitigation side. On the community-wide, we've actually reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 20% through all the different initiatives that we've implemented. Our city actually has the largest electric vehicle fleet in the state of Florida and one of the largest charging infrastructure networks in the state, right here in the city that you're in today. We have great partnerships with the University of Miami as well, because it's a great think tank. I mean, I think a lot of what we're looking at can be overwhelming at times, the threats that we face, sea level rise, heat. But I think it's also exciting to be a part of it, because there's solutions out there that we may not even know yet, and whether it comes to tech, and our city's done a lot on smart cities as well. We have a lot of sensors set up throughout our city measuring water quality, environmental sensors, other environmental sensors, air quality. So really educating our community as well, and sharing that data with them and making it publicly available. And then on the adaptation side, our city was actually one of the first cities to start a sea level rise mitigation fund. We see with the city of Miami, the city of Miami Beach, are spending on adaptation. So our city said, you know what, we're going to be investing in our infrastructure now, but we also want to set a pool of money aside for future leadership to be able to invest in or use for matching grants. So right now, we have about $15 million set in that fund. The goal is $100 million by 2040. And most cities are just trying to balance their budget at the end of each year, right? Our city commission and our leadership is saying, no, we're not, in addition to doing that, we're going to set money aside for future generations to be able to invest in adaptation, because we know how expensive that will be.
Matt, you said a lot in that answer, actually, and you began with the question of transportation, which I think we saw clearly highlighted in the Medellin presentations. Of course, here we're more of a car-centric solution as opposed to cities that have adopted robust public transit. But I think that might be a good segue to perhaps have you, Galen, weigh in, because your role really is the head of climate technology and economic innovation for all of Miami-Dade County, also play an important role in shepherding this forward. So can you provide, in a similar fashion, maybe a few examples of what you're currently doing at Miami-Dade County? Maybe you can comment specifically on your flood management efforts.
Sure, yeah. So I've been in this role for a year, right, as of March, and it's a new position. And I think many of you saw the mayor yesterday. She is very concerned about climate and also very hopeful that we can address a whole suite of issues by like engaging these specific topics, including our economy, equity, and how we engage with the whole community through collaboration. And I think of this as an implementation piece. You all saw that we have a ton of plans. And the fact of the matter is that across this country, and really across the world, our climate plans have not been implemented very consistently. And we now have the plans. We had a great plan in 2010. We got a new mayor. He wasn't invested in that plan, and it didn't get fully implemented. If it had, we would be in a different situation right now. And I think that what's really key is that we start doing stuff. And I want to respond a little bit to what I saw. I think what's really exciting about what I saw in Medellin is that the goal there seems to be to keep the community together and make sure that what we're doing serves the community. We're, majority immigrant community here. Most of the people who live here were not born here, but I'm frankly concerned that people who were born here are being displaced. Right? Either it doesn't look like their city, it doesn't feel like their city, or they can't afford it. They can't have their home here. So like what you're talking about, it's important that we have a vision that includes the folks who live here right now. And that's the equity piece. I can get into all kinds of details on our flood mitigation, but I would just say that like we have to partner with the Army Corps of Engineers and the South Florida Water Management District. Without the work that they've done, we wouldn't be here. It's not possible. We would be flooding regularly. We couldn't have nearly 3 million people living here. And then finally, going forward, we're at this really interesting moment where with all of the federal funding that we have for climate, for infrastructure, and for mitigation, at the same time, we can now stop doing adaptation and mitigation separately. We can just bring them together and do that work together now. And I think that we are in this very exciting moment where for a long time we've been thinking about those separately and talking about it separately and to some degree investing separately, and now we can bring it together.
Yeah, I would be interested in listening to what both our presenter, or all three presenters would have to say about that. But perhaps before we get into that, I think Liz began with an overview, really talking about these broad tactics of adaptation versus mitigation. And then I guess Giancarlo ended with the building, right? The power of architecture to make transformation. And so maybe my question would go to you, Alvaro. Throughout Miami, as in the case of Latin America, still a city that builds largely in concrete. However, in discussions about sustainable construction, concrete is often criticized as being, for instance, less sustainable than wood or steel. So can you share Double C's perspective, or at least your vision of Double C's perspective on this?
Yes, so definitely there's still a perception that concrete is less sustainable than other materials, especially wood. I am particularly fond of the work that we're doing as designers and builders, not con concreto, that we'll see, but just the industry overall. The work that's being done in vertical construction with mass timber. There are great opportunities to use different materials, not only the ones that you mentioned, but like plastics and other biodegradable materials. However, there's a reason why concrete is still the standard product used in construction, especially infrastructure, and it is because it is cheap to produce, has a long life cycle, low maintenance cost, and it is resilient when exposed to the weather, right? So I think we have a duty in the private sector, especially with the help of researchers, like the ones in the University of Miami, and with the leadership and regulations established by the government institutions, the federal, state or municipal level, to set a base to ensure that whenever we use concrete or alternatives that are similar to it, that we're more sustainable. We reduce the carbon footprint. We could do it as designers. We have state-of-the-art technology that allow us to be more efficient when we do work, right? Instead of using the tried and true methods, we could try to reduce the amount of material being used. At Double C, we successfully developed a plan to save 16 million gallons of water with the Transmillennium Pass Rapid Transit System development that was then in Bogotá, by changing approaches to the foundation system that was done there, and it basically reduced like almost 8,000 linear feet of piling that was required. However, if you need to use concrete, you need to find ways to change the way it's being produced. So cement is one of the biggest culprits in terms of CO2 emissions. And there are great developments in the last few years to use recyclable materials, and reduce the amount of cement, or use geopolymers, just do away with it at all. I think that, plus using FRP reinforcement, taking away some of the steel reinforcement that's being used in construction, and especially recycling concrete, moving forward, it's going to lessen that carbon footprint.
So maybe concrete might not be such a bad guy. We're here to discuss that further. I mean, of course, building in Miami, I'm well aware that concrete has all of the characteristics that you just mentioned. And perhaps if we transition, I was struck that Natalia and Giancarlo, Medellin is really an extraordinary example of transformation, that it begins with the overview that you provided and then ends with that beautiful image in the video, where in all cases they spoke about beauty. At the end of the day, the search for beauty, the monument that you provided for them, Giancarlo, I think, allows the community to gain a sense of pride. And so I'm curious, I think is it a decade now since the building of that building? I'm curious to know, what is it like now for that community? Are these buildings being used in the ways that you imagine them? Have they produced the kind of social transformation that you hoped? Maybe that's a lot for one building to do, but I'm curious, what is this on the ground like now?
I would like not only about the library, which now is remaking the building, but in general the public buildings in Medellin have the power to improve the community. The community is connected with these buildings, and they make it a social life around these buildings. Why? Because the buildings have the power to visibility, the big strategy, urban strategy of the city, made for Natalia, Alejandro, and the mayor of the city. But the building is the end of the big urban planification before. But the building has to be the power to visibility these strategies. But I think the urban strategy is not only the form to make the city. The buildings have this power, and I'm convinced of this condition of the architectural.
I think there is something that we can really learn from Medellin, because much of your work there has been the result of public competitions, which is something that the United States doesn't do very well. So oftentimes young firms that have really innovative ideas don't have the opportunity to execute buildings because they don't have a portfolio of buildings. And I think we can see in places like Medellin how that process can lead to great contributions to the city. So it's maybe something
maybe it's the only democratic condition to share the architects is the city. Europe and in Latin America, we have this form to make about the public competition. Maybe it's the more democratic condition, the more young can be buildings, public buildings, and it's open and the discussion for everybody. I think it is the only possibility to democratic to make architecture.
Natalia, from your perspective, is there anything that we can learn, given not only your implementation of your ideas, but the execution of them?
I found, and he mentioned that we have many plans, many ideas about the climate change, about the problems that we have, but we have to move forward to the implementation. In Medellin, what we did is to define pilot projects, just to do like a laboratory, take the city like a laboratory, to put together all the actors, the stakeholders that could be part of the project, and then do our replicability of these projects in the other parts of the city. We took the risk to do public projects in like a pilot, to learn about it and then to do more for the city. I think we have to move forward to this, and I agree with that. It's important because it's the only way that we could connect the design, the public sector, the academia, the technology to work together and to find the good solution for this social context, geographic context, and it helps also to discuss based in the experience.
So test large or test small for large implications. So maybe ending with Liz. Liz, you spoke about adaptation versus mitigation, and I think Galen referred to perhaps we need to be doing this at the same time. So are we destined to all migrate to Medellin, the hills of Medellin?
An interesting prospect. I'd like to build on something that Galen said, because I think one of the lessons that we're hearing from south of our border is the importance of participation and of many participants, including the power of the university in setting the vision, and then the profession participating in it. And I wonder if, in order to avoid the 2010 plan being set aside again and again, given the back and forth of American politics these days, whether our climate resilience, whether our Resilience Academy couldn't play an important role partnering with the public agencies. I was impressed about the Coral Gables news that we heard to really keep that agenda moving and addressing the immediate achievements that can be made, as well as those long-term scenarios that nobody really wants to address yet.
We have an extraordinary panel, given the very compressed time schedule, I don't know, Dina, are we able to take any questions from the crowd? Okay, so I'm going to leave it in the capable hands of our excellent dean to be able to complete this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carrie, for putting this together. Thank you. So yes, let's have some questions.
Well, more than a question, after listening to everyone, I think there's a great lesson that we can learn also from all what's happening in Medellin as a Colombian. Actually, I think...
Yeah, it's better.
So, I think another lesson that we can learn from all the Medellin experience has to do with politics. Because at the end, all what we have heard in this panel, we have heard about architecture, about urban planning, about construction technology, we've heard about climate and economic innovation, we have heard about sustainability. But I think that what has brought Medellin to what it is right now, it's that even though politics have changed from one side to the other in the city, there has been a long-term vision of what the city could and should be. So even though politicians have changed, they have managed a way to continue to have continuity in all these projects that we, here in the States and in Europe, we know that every time the government changes, all the programs change. And everyone wants to leave his own print in all this process. In Medellin, I don't know how they have managed to pass from one mayor to another, this future vision of the city that has been moving forward for the past 10, 20 years. And I think that's what made possible all these projects like the ones Giancarlo has done, or all the urban ideas and technology implementation that Natalia explained. Great.
We have the same problems. It's very similar. We change of politicians every 4 years. But I think it's important to improve the capacities in university, because the university could continue doing public debate, doing research and some projects very connected with the challenge of the city, but also the social organization, the citizens organization is very important to improve them also, because they continue. besides the political changes. So we have now a problem because the last mayor are changing many things that we built in the last year, but we have to move and to continue from the university, from the social organization, from the different spaces of the city to be together and to dialogue. For example, the private sector is very organized in a foundation that is called Pro Antioquia. They also are very concerned about the public problems, and they are also doing projects to be to have presence in the public debate. So I think we have the same problems, but we have to also have more structure for the other institutions.
Yeah, you guys can hear me. I think that that's really important, and I would just say here in Miami, to maintain this, we need the private sector to step up a bit more. The real estate development community in Miami is foundational and super strong, and I think, you know, just straight up, I will ask you, if you know folks, ask them to step up and be leaders and set that vision and invest in these new materials, because we have to show to the regulators and to the community that they're safe. You know, that there's some safety in it. I'm super excited to chat more with you. I just wanted to say that, like, I think here in Miami, we have amazing universities, we have some extraordinary nonprofits, we have cities that are leading, but Coral Gables isn't the rest of the community. You know? Hialeah is another city, and they have not made that same investment. And
Unfortunately, we have to end here. Thank you very much. And we take